There comes a moment, quiet, heavy, and absolute, when a choice must be made. Not a small one, not a surface-level switch or a convenient pivot. No, a real decision, one that splits your path in half, one that tears through comfort, shatters illusion, and forces you to confront who you really are. These moments don't come often, but when they do, they define you. Not by what you say, not by what you believe, but by what you do. The tough decision, the one that costs you something, is where your identity is revealed. But most people avoid these moments. They hide, they delay, they disguise procrastination as gathering information. They dress up indecision as being careful. But deep down, they know the truth. The longer they wait, the weaker they become. Every delay chips away at their certainty. Every excuse thickens the fog. And the more time passes, the heavier the weight becomes, until eventually they either collapse under it or get dragged somewhere they never chose. Because make no mistake, if you don't make the decision, the world will make it for you. And the world doesn't care how much it hurts you. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He didn't believe in softness disguised as morality. He believed in clarity, execution, and the brutal art of necessity. He wrote, "Not for the comfortable man, but for the man standing at the edge of war, at the edge of betrayal, at the edge of a moment where hesitation could cost him everything. And for that man, there was only one law: act. Not perfectly, not emotionally, but decisively. Because indecision is worse than the wrong decision. At least the wrong choice teaches you. Indecision only weakens you. So how do you make the tough call? Especially when it hurts. You start by killing the fantasy that it shouldn't hurt. That pain is a sign something's wrong. That discomfort means you're not ready. This is the lie modern softness feeds you. That pain is a signal to wait. That difficulty means doubt. But pain isn't a problem. It's a price. And anything worth having in this life comes at a price. Peace costs isolation. Success costs rejection. Self-respect costs relationships. Growth costs comfort. And the one who learns to pay is the one who learns to rule. There's a reason most people stay average. It's not because they lack intelligence or skill. It's because they refuse to bleed. They refuse to make the tough decision when the consequences are real. They'd rather protect a feeling than protect their future. They'd rather stay liked than stay aligned. But Machiavelli would say, if your principles disappear the moment they become inconvenient, you never had principles, you had preferences. And preference is a weak master. It bends, it negotiates, it seeks approval. Principle, on the other hand, cuts. Principle divides. Principle makes enemies. Because real principle demands sacrifice. And if your decision doesn't cost you anything, it isn't a decision, it's a convenience. So the first step is brutal clarity. Not what feels right, not what's the safest, but what must be done. Remove emotion, remove noise, strip it down to the raw logic of necessity. What protects your long-term vision? What honors your values without apology? What aligns with the identity you're building, even if no one claps for it? That's your answer. But here's where the pain sharpens. Because once you know what must be done, the next move is the hardest. You do it anyway, even if it hurts, even if you shake, even if your voice breaks when you say it. You do it. Maybe it's walking away from someone who still has pieces of your heart. Maybe it's shutting down a dream that no longer fits the reality. Maybe it's firing someone you care about. Maybe it's burning a bridge that no longer leads anywhere. Whatever it is, you don't flinch, you execute. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. And in that moment, something strange happens. When you act on truth, Even when it's painful, you begin to trust yourself. That trust doesn't come from success. It comes from alignment, from knowing that when the moment came, you didn't fold, you didn't beg, you didn't compromise. You chose the path that matched your values, not your fears. That's how self-respect is built, not through wins, but through sacrifice. Machiavelli knew that a leader who couldn't make hard decisions would be eaten alive. A prince who sought to be loved over being respected would be destroyed by the very people he tried to please. The same applies to you. You're not a ruler of nations, but you are the ruler of your life. And if you keep dodging pain to protect comfort, your empire, your time, your energy, your identity will be ruled by others. So here's the law. The more it hurts to choose, the more likely it's the right path, because the easy road is always crowded. The hard road, that one's quiet, lonely, but it leads to sovereignty. You have to get comfortable with being misunderstood, with being called selfish, with being seen as cold, because people will hate the version of you that doesn't serve their agenda. They'll call your discipline arrogance. They'll call your standards toxic. They'll call your refusal to stay small betrayal. And you can't defend yourself every time. You can't clarify your heart to people committed to misreading it. The ones who get it, get it. The ones who don't, aren't supposed to. Tough decisions will always come with loss. That's part of the deal. Something must be left behind so something greater can be built. And most people sabotage themselves here. They want to grow without letting go. They want to evolve without shedding. But transformation requires death. The death of old versions, old habits, old relationships. And the faster you learn to bury what no longer serves you, the faster your future arrives. This isn't cruelty. This is necessity. You're not a villain for doing what needs to be done. You're only a villain in the eyes of those who benefited from your weakness. And here's a deeper truth. Sometimes, making the right decision won't feel good at all. Sometimes it will feel like grief, like betrayal, like punishment. But that feeling isn't failure. It's friction. The friction between who you were and who you're becoming. That pain is the fire that forges the new you. And the more it burns, the more permanent the change. But this is where most people escape. They start bargaining with themselves. They start saying things like, maybe I can make it work. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I owe them another chance. That's not grace, that's fear. And fear is a liar. It dresses up weakness as compassion. But Machiavelli would remind you, compassion without discipline is chaos. It creates emotional debt that you'll have to pay for later, often with interest. So you pull the trigger, you cut the cord, you sever the tie, even if it leaves you shaking, even if it keeps you up at night. Because strength isn't being unbothered. It's being willing to be bothered for the right reasons. It's crying after the decision, but never reversing it. And once you've made the cut, once you've paid the price, you don't reopen the wound. That's the final rule. No second guessing, no reaching back, no re-explaining your reasons to people who never cared to understand them in the first place. You made the decision. Now, you live it. Walk forward with your head high and your past behind. Let them talk. Let them question. Let them judge. You're not here to be agreed with. You're here to be in command. Now the choice has been made. The cord has been cut. The noise begins. Some of it comes from others. Most of it comes from within. The doubt creeps in like smoke under the door. It whispers, did I do the right thing? It asks you to rewind the decision in your mind, to dissect it, to pick it apart until what was once clarity becomes confusion. And that's where you either ascend or collapse. Because here's what Machiavelli understood that most never will. power doesn't come from making a hard choice once. It comes from standing on it when everything inside you tries to pull you back. The mind, especially a mind trained to avoid discomfort, will try to rescue itself from pain. It will say anything to restore the old comfort. It will rationalize anything to avoid guilt. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I could have handled that better. Maybe I was the problem. It doesn't matter how right the decision was. If you let that internal noise win, you'll unravel. Not because you were wrong, but because you abandoned your post. And nothing weakens authority like watching the king walk backwards. You must understand. Your decision will be tested, not once, but constantly. Through silence, through pressure, through backlash, through whispers, through emotional residue that lingers long after the moment has passed. That's how life checks if you really meant it. That's how the universe confirms whether this new identity is real or just theater. And most people fail this test because they want emotional closure. They want validation. They want someone to say, "You did the right thing." But Machiavelli didn't wait for approval. He knew, the greater the decision, the lonelier it feels, because no one else lives with the cost. Only you do. That's why you must train your mind to embrace emotional ambiguity, to sit with the pain and refuse to negotiate with it, to feel the discomfort but refuse to reverse course. Because pain doesn't mean you're wrong. Pain means you're becoming. This is why most people can't handle leadership, even in their own lives. They confuse grief with guilt. They assume that if they're hurting, they've made a mistake. But hurt is not always a mistake. Sometimes it's a rite of passage. It's what happens when you peel away from something you've outgrown, when you reject an identity that no longer fits, when you detach from people who were never meant to join you at the next level. That pain isn't a warning. It's confirmation. Confirmation that you've stopped lying to yourself. But this is the hard truth no one wants to admit. Being aligned will often make you look like the villain, because tough decisions never please the crowd. They always upset someone. And if your identity is tied to being liked, being understood, or being the good guy, you will sabotage your own path just to keep your reputation clean. But Machiavelli warned us, those who try to maintain the image of virtue without enforcing real principle become victims of their own reputation. They try to be saints in a world that only rewards kings. So here's the shift. Stop trying to be understood. Start focusing on being respected. And respect doesn't always feel warm. It often arrives in silence, in distance, in the way people stop testing you, the way they adjust their tone, the way they hesitate before speaking your name. That's respect. And it's rarely handed out to the agreeable. It's earned through hard lines and harder choices. You'll notice something strange happen as you remain firm. People who once laughed at your softness will begin to recalibrate. They'll speak more cautiously. They'll test you less. Some will drift. Some will slander you. But some will transform in your presence. Because the enforcement of your standard doesn't just cleanse your space, it elevates it. The ones meant to rise with you will rise. The ones meant to fall away will fall. That's the natural order. That's the price of evolution. And while others talk of boundaries, you live them. While others post about integrity, you bleed for it. While others seek balance, you endure chaos with conviction. Because you've understood the final rule of tough decision-making. True peace only comes after the fire, not before it, not during it, after. The fire of loss, the fire of isolation, the fire of judgment. That's what clears the debris. That's what burns away the masks. That's what reveals the real you. Charred, maybe, but clean. You'll also begin to see with sharper eyes. Because once you've made one brutal decision, you develop a sense for everything that needs to be cut. The friendship you've been tolerating for years out of nostalgia, gone. The job that pays well but poisons your soul. You feel the clock ticking louder. The habits that sedated your growth in the name of balance. They glow like red alarms in your mind. You see it all now. Because once you've tasted alignment, anything less becomes unbearable. And this brings us to the most Machiavellian aspect of the process. You start to feel nothing for the opinions that once controlled you. The guilt fades. The shame melts. The need to be seen as reasonable or gentle disappears. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've become sovereign. You're not playing their game anymore. You're not auditioning for approval. You're not walking on emotional eggshells for people who never deserved your loyalty. You've realized something deeper. The people who love the real you will never need you to betray yourself to earn it. And now the decisions come easier. Not because they hurt less, but because you've accepted the cost. You've normalized the fire. You've built an inner architecture that can withstand temporary pain in exchange for permanent peace. And when others ask how you do it, how you walk away so clean, how you stand so firm, they won't understand that your clarity is forged in pain, that every sharp edge in your personality is a scar, that every boundary you enforce is a battle you already fought within. This is the secret no one wants to say out loud. Peace is not a natural state. It's a built fortress, built decision by decision, choice by choice, sacrifice by sacrifice. And most people will never live inside that fortress because they refuse to pay the price to build it. But you've paid. And because you've paid, you own your life now. You don't explain yourself. You don't entertain guilt. You don't question the path. You walk it. Eyes forward, feet planted, vision clear. And when the next decision comes, and it will, you won't wait. You won't delay. You won't fold under emotion. You'll act, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, because you've learned that hurt is holy. That pain is proof that what makes you bleed is often what makes you real. Now, you stand on new ground. The decisions have been made. The losses have been counted. The dust has settled. And what remains is a quieter world. Not quieter because the noise is gone, but because your response to it has changed. You no longer flinch at discomfort. You no longer seek clarity in chaos. You've earned your peace by walking through fire, and what you've discovered is something Machiavelli always knew. The most powerful man is not the one who avoids pain. It's the one who uses it. Because tough decisions don't just shape your outcomes, they sculpt your character. Every time you say no to comfort and yes to truth, your internal foundation hardens. Your instincts sharpen. Your values crystallize. And while the world screams about self-care and softness, you begin to understand the quiet dignity of self-rule. You don't need permission. You don't need applause. You don't even need support. You move because your vision demands it. And that internal compass, that's what Machiavelli would call authority, not over others, but over yourself. This is the transformation most will never reach because they confuse movement with progress. They chase more, but avoid meaning. They think leadership is about being followed, but you know the truth now. Leadership is about being willing to walk alone, especially when it hurts. Especially when the decision you make costs you the illusion of safety, or the applause of the crowd, or the company of the familiar. That's when your spine is revealed. Not in what you say, in what you sacrifice. And make no mistake, there will always be a cost. Every gain demands a loss. Every decision that takes you forward requires leaving something behind. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's a version of yourself. Sometimes it's a belief that once gave you comfort but now keeps you small. But once you understand that loss is not your enemy, it's your entry fee, you stop hesitating. You stop grieving potential outcomes that never really belonged to you. You stop praying for an easier path and start asking better questions. What is required of me? What must I cut? What must I face? That's how clarity is earned. You begin to understand that real decisions are not made in ideal circumstances. They're made when you're tired, when you're alone, when the noise is loud and the comfort of waiting is tempting. But you don't wait anymore. Waiting is a strategy for the weak. You act. And because you act, your world begins to shift. People treat you differently, not always kindly, but with caution. They sense something unshakable, something exact. They no longer bring you mess. They no longer bring you distractions. They no longer bring you offers that compromise your values, because they know you don't negotiate with chaos. But there's another level even deeper, a level where the game changes entirely. When you've made enough hard decisions, when you've sat in the fire long enough, something clicks. The pain is still there, but now it's familiar, predictable. It's not a warning anymore. It's a ritual. You've crossed a line most never will. You've become emotionally bulletproof. And this isn't numbness. It's refinement. You feel everything, but you're no longer ruled by it. You cry in silence. You bleed without breaking. You lose without crumbling. Because your identity isn't built on feelings, it's built on enforcement. That's the Machiavellian principle most confuse. They think it's about coldness, about cruelty, about cutting everything just to feel powerful. But that's not what it is. Machiavellian strength is about making decisions rooted in necessity, not ego. It's about aligning your actions with long-term strategy, even when short-term emotion begs you to fold. It's about seeing 10 moves ahead, not 10 seconds ahead. And that level of thinking requires one thing above all: emotional discipline. That's what separates the ruler from the ruled. The ruler chooses pain when it leads to peace. The ruled chooses comfort, even when it leads to chaos. The ruler asks, what is the cost of avoidance? The ruled asks, what if it's hard? But you no longer ask if it's hard. You ask only if it's right. And if it is, you do it, without delay, without apology. But now the game evolves even further. You begin to see decision-making not as a reaction, but as an art. You learn timing, when to strike, when to wait, when to speak, when to vanish. You learn how to gather leverage before you move. You don't cut blindly, you calculate. You don't confront out of emotion. You observe until the right moment reveals itself. This isn't passive. This is patient warfare. The kind that wins without raising a sword. The kind that rewrites dynamics through posture alone. Because here's the final lesson. The toughest decisions are not just about what you do. They're about what you no longer tolerate, what you no longer entertain, what you no longer justify. You reach a point where your life becomes so clean, so aligned, so intentional, that even a small compromise feels like a threat. That's how it should be. That's not rigidity. That's reverence. Reverence for your time. Reverence for your mission. Reverence for the version of you that had to suffer to get here. And make no mistake, there will always be people who don't understand you, who call your decisiveness cold, who call your detachment arrogance, who call your boundaries walls. Let them talk. You're not here to be decoded by the undisciplined. You're not here to explain your strength to the soft. You're not here to dilute your clarity to make others comfortable. You're here to build something rare, something that requires conviction, solitude, sacrifice, and steel. And that can only be built when you've made enough brutal decisions to earn the blueprint. So keep choosing. Not softly, not politely, but with finality. Let people adjust or leave. Let emotions rise, then pass. Let fear whisper, then vanish. You've outgrown hesitation. You've outgrown explaining. You've outgrown the version of yourself that waited for confirmation before acting. Now you move. Swift, sharp, exact. You protect your energy like a king guards a throne. You choose silence over debate, distance over confusion, alignment over approval. And when it hurts, you remember. The pain is proof you're on the right path, not because it's punishment, but because it's purification. The next time the decision comes, you won't hesitate. You'll recognize the feeling. You'll nod at the discomfort, and you'll act not out of impulse, but out of clarity. Not because it feels good, but because it's necessary. And necessary always wins, because you are no longer someone who hopes things work out. You are someone who makes them. And if it hurts, let it. You'll still choose. Because that's what it means to be unshakable. That's what it means to rule. That's what it means to live with no divided mind. Ever again.